This family controls more of your daily life than Google, Amazon, and Apple combined. Yet most people have never even heard their name. The DuPonts didn't just get rich, they rewrote the rules of American capitalism, using 3 secret strategies that turned a small gunpowder business into a $15 billion empire. But here's the shocking part. Their most profitable ventures weren't chemicals or plastics. It was something far more sinister, something they've spent centuries trying to hide from the public. Let me show you exactly how one French immigrant family became the puppet masters of American industry. Picture this. It's 1802. A young French aristocrat named Eleuthère Irénée DuPont arrives in America with nothing but a dream and some very dangerous knowledge. His father had been France's top gunpowder expert, and now the son was about to use those secrets to build an empire that would control America for the next 2 centuries. But here's what's fascinating. He didn't just want to make gunpowder. He wanted to control the entire explosive industry. And he had a plan. So brilliant, so ruthless, that it would become the blueprint for corporate domination in America. The first thing Eleuthère DuPont did was choose his location strategically. He built his factory on the Brandywine River in Delaware, not because it was pretty, but because it gave him 3 massive advantages. First, the river provided the water power he needed for his mills. Second, Delaware's laws were business-friendly. And third, and this is crucial, it was close enough to major cities to supply them, but far enough away that if something exploded, it wouldn't take out half of Philadelphia. And explosions were a real problem. Gunpowder manufacturing was incredibly dangerous. Workers died regularly. Entire factories would disappear in massive blasts. But he had learned something from his father that his competitors hadn't. Safety wasn't just about protecting workers. It was about protecting profits. While his competitors were losing factories to explosions and workers to accidents, Eleuthère Irénée DuPont was doing something no one else dared to do. He implemented revolutionary safety measures. He built his buildings far apart, used water-powered machinery instead of spark-producing equipment, and created detailed safety protocols that his workers had to follow religiously. But here's the genius part. He didn't share these safety secrets with anyone. While his competitors were literally blowing themselves up, his factories kept running smoothly. And when the War of 1812 broke out, and America desperately needed gunpowder, guess who was the only reliable supplier? That's right, Eleuthère DuPont's. The U.S. government became completely dependent on him. And once you control something the government needs, you don't just have a business. You have power. By 1815, DuPont was supplying half of America's gunpowder. But he wasn't satisfied with half. He wanted it all. So, this is where Henry DuPont and Alfred V. DuPont showed their true genius. Instead of trying to compete with other gunpowder companies, they simply bought them out. One by one, every major competitor was either acquired or driven out of business. But they didn't do it the way you might think. They didn't just throw money around. They were surgical about it. They would identify a competitor's weakness, maybe cash flow problems, a factory explosion, or even family disputes. And then Henry and Alfred DuPont would swoop in with an offer that seemed generous, but was actually a trap. Here's how it worked. They would offer to buy a struggling company for what seemed like a fair price. But buried in the contract were clauses that gave the DuPont family control over the company's patents, their customer lists, and most importantly, their trade secrets. The former owners thought they were getting a good deal, but they were actually handing over everything that made their business valuable. By 1880, the DuPont Company controlled 85% of America's explosive industry. They had created what economists call a natural monopoly. They were so big, so efficient, that no one else could compete. But the DuPonts weren't done. They had bigger plans. By the early 20th century, a new generation had taken over, led by Pierre S. DuPont and his brothers. Here's where the story gets really interesting. Around 1900, Pierre S. DuPont realized something crucial. Gunpowder alone wouldn't make them the richest family in America. They needed to expand. But instead of just buying random companies, they had a master plan. They started investing in chemistry. Not just any chemistry, the kind that would touch every aspect of American life. Under Pierre's leadership, they developed new materials, new processes, new products that people didn't even know they needed yet. Just nylon, Teflon, Kevlar, Lycra, Freon. These weren't just products, they were revolutions. And the DuPont family, through the leadership of Pierre S. DuPont and later Lamotte DuPont II, owned them all. Think about your morning routine. You wake up on sheets that probably contain DuPont fibers. You brush your teeth with a toothbrush made from their plastics. You cook your breakfast in a pan coated with their Teflon. You get dressed in clothes that contain DuPont materials. And then you drive to work in a car that has hundreds of DuPont components. The S. DuPont and his successors didn't just make products. They made the materials that other companies used to make products. They positioned themselves at the foundation of the entire American economy. But here's what they never told anyone. Their dark secret. Remember how I said their most profitable ventures weren't chemicals or plastics? Here's the truth. The one the DuPont family has spent over a century trying to hide. Their real fortune came from war. Every major American conflict, from the War of 1812 to World War II, made the DuPonts richer. They didn't just supply gunpowder, they supplied explosives for mining, chemicals for weapons, materials for military equipment. When America went to war, the DuPont family got paid. But it gets even darker. During World War I, Pierre S. DuPont and Alfred I. DuPont made so much money that their profits increased by over 1,000%. They literally became billionaires from human conflict. And here's the most shocking part. They helped start some of those conflicts. Pierre S. DuPont and Irene DuPont had representatives in Washington who would lobby for military interventions, not because they believed in the cause, but because war was good for business. Internal company documents revealed during congressional investigations in the 1930s showed that DuPont executives, under Pierre S. DuPont's oversight, referred to World War I as our war, because it had been so profitable for them. After World War I, the American public started asking some uncomfortable questions about war profiteering. Pierre S. DuPont and Irene DuPont realized they had a serious problem. They were getting too much attention for all the wrong reasons. So, they launched one of the most sophisticated public relations campaigns in American history. Pierre S. DuPont rebranded the company from a weapons manufacturer to a science company. Their new slogan? Better things for better living through chemistry. There started funding universities, sponsoring research, positioning themselves as innovators who were making life better for everyone. They wanted people to think of DuPont as the company that gave you nylon stockings and nonstick pans, not the company that made the explosives that killed millions during World War I. But behind the scenes, they were still the same company. They were still making weapons. They were still profiting from conflict. They had just gotten better at hiding it. In the 1940s and 50s, Lamont DuPont II and his research division discovered something that would make them even richer than war. Chemicals that people would use every single day without ever thinking about it. They developed a chemical called PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid. It was used to make Teflon. But there was a problem. It was toxic. Really toxic. DuPont's own scientists, including teams under Charles Stein, knew it caused cancer, birth defects, and other serious health problems. But instead of stopping production, they covered it up. For over 50 years, DuPont dumped PFOA into rivers, released it into the air, and exposed their own workers to it, all while knowing it was killing people. They had internal studies showing that PFOA was dangerous as early as 1961. But they didn't tell the EPA. They didn't tell their workers. They didn't tell the communities living near their factories. They just kept making money. When people started getting sick, and I mean really sick, cancers, birth defects, immune disorders, DuPont's lawyers would settle quietly and force the victims to sign non-disclosure agreements so no one would ever hear what had really happened. But here's what makes the DuPont family different from other wealthy dynasties. They didn't just accumulate wealth. They accumulated control. They used their money to influence politics, shape regulations, and control information. Pierre S. DuPont, Irénée DuPont, and Alfred I. DuPont had direct access to Washington. Members of the family sat in Congress, in presidential cabinets, and on the boards of major corporations. They funded think tanks that produced research supporting their interests. Irénée DuPont even founded the American Liberty League to lobby against government regulation and labor reforms that threatened their profits. When the government tried to break up their monopoly in the early 1900s, Pierre and Alfred used their political connections to weaken antitrust laws. When scientists later discovered the health effects of their chemicals, DuPont funded counter-research designed to create doubt and confusion. They had perfected the art of what economists call regulatory capture, the process by which the companies that are supposed to be regulated end up controlling the regulators instead. Today, the DuPont empire is bigger than ever. Even though most people have no idea, the company's been split up, merged, renamed a dozen times. But the DuPont family's influence, it never disappeared. They control Corteva, one of the world's largest agricultural companies. They hold major stakes in Chemours, the firm that makes chemicals used in everything, from smartphones to solar panels. They're in the companies that make materials for electric car batteries, the coatings for wind turbines, and even the components for 5G networks. Every time you use your phone, drive your car, or eat food grown with modern fertilizers and pesticides, you're interacting with DuPont technology. They've placed themselves right at the center of every major technological trend. But they've also positioned themselves to avoid responsibility. When people get sick from their chemicals, they point to the subsidiaries. When environmental disasters happen, they blame the contractors. When workers are injured, they shrug and say it's the fault of local management. And now, we reach the ultimate secret. Here's what the DuPont family never wants you to know. They've built a system where they profit from both the problem and the solution. They make the chemicals that pollute the planet, and then they make the technologies to clean it up. They create the materials that cause health problems, and then they invest in the pharmaceutical companies that treat those problems. They build the weapons that start wars, and then they make the materials to rebuild what those wars destroy. It's the perfect business model. Create the demand by creating the problem, and then sell the solution. For over 200 years, the DuPont family has been perfecting this system. They've made themselves indispensable to American society, while becoming one of the greatest threats to American health and safety. And then, the most terrifying part? They're still doing it. Right now, as you watch this video, DuPont companies are developing new chemicals, new materials, new technologies that will shape your life in ways you can't even imagine. So, the next time you wonder why certain problems never seem to get solved, why regulations never seem to pass, why certain companies never face real consequences, remember the DuPonts. Remember that there are families who've spent centuries learning how to control the system from the shadows. So they don't need to be famous. They don't need to be on magazine covers. They just need to be in control. And they are. So, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.